Find out what life in the NBA is like on and off the court for Iowa Hawkeye Gone Bulls, B.J. Armstrong. Watch Pat Paris in his two-part series, Bullish on B.J., Monday at 10 on News Center 13.
This is WHO TV 13 Des Moines.
Hello again, I'm Tim Russert, and this is Meet the Press. Our issues: taxes, the budget, and the presidential campaign. Our guest, House Majority Leader Richard Gephardt of Missouri and Senator Lloyd Bentsen of Texas.
From NBC News, this is Meet the Press with Tim Russert.
The House Democrats have a tax plan, parts of which the Senate Democrats disagree with, most of which a leading Democratic presidential candidate rejects, and all of which President Bush said he will veto. Beyond the politics, will any of this do anything for the economy? We'll ask two men in the middle of it all, both of whom were once and perhaps future presidential candidates. Later in our program, we'll talk with Lloyd Bentsen, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. Joining us now from our affiliate KSDK-TV in St. Louis, Missouri, House Majority Leader Richard Gephardt. Mr. Gephardt, welcome to Meet the Press.
Hello, Tim. Good to be with you.
And joining me at our table this morning, David Broder of the Washington Post and R.W. Johnny Apple of the New York Times. Let's talk some politics right up top, Mr. Gephardt. It's March 1. The Democrats seem to be in disarray. You ready to jump into the presidential race?
Well, Tim, you know, the disarray is really on the Republican side. Pat Buchanan is dealing the president a fit. He's getting big votes in New Hampshire and South Dakota. It looks like he's going to get a big vote in Georgia. I think the disarray is on the other side. I think the Democrats are going to win in '92, and I think one of the people out there running for president as a Democrat is going to be our candidate and is going to be our winner.
There's a report in the Washington Post this morning that no less than 10 days ago, your presidential campaign was near operational. Is that true?
It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, the people that are out there running have been putting a vision in front of the American people. They've been putting issues in front of people, talking about what they would like to do to move this country in a new direction. We need jobs. We need investment in our future. I think the Democrats are setting out a dramatic new vision for our country, and I think the American people are going to respond to that this fall.
So the nominee will be one of the 5 people currently running in the Democratic field.
You know, absolutely. Every time we go through this, people talk about new entrants, and we're not getting to a conclusion. This is early in the campaign. We haven't even gotten to Super Tuesday yet. One of these people will be nominated, and I'm excited about our chance of putting a Democrat in the White House. I'm even more excited about moving this country in a new direction, and I think any one of them will do it, and I look forward to working with them in the Congress.
The Missouri caucus is March 10. Who will you support?
I haven't made that decision yet. This has a long way to go. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens this next Tuesday in about 4 or 5 states.
On March 13th, your Democratic colleagues in the caucus will elect 218 so-called superdelegates. Will you ask them to take a position, or will you recommend that they stay uncommitted?
Each of them makes their own decision. Some of my colleagues have already endorsed one of the candidates. Others are remaining uncommitted. I think before too much longer, you're going to see most of the members of the House backing one candidate or the other. And again, this process moves to a conclusion fairly rapidly. I'd say within a month, you might see one of these candidates emerging as the real front runner and putting away enough delegates to be the nominee.
Mr. Gephardt, this past week, as you know, you and your colleagues passed a tax bill in the House that cuts taxes, some for the middle class, raises taxes quite a bit for the wealthy. The President says he'll veto the bill. Is that the point? Is that all you really wanted to establish, that you have one philosophy and he has another?
Not at all, David. Our responsibility is to pass a tax bill that will help get us out of this recession and help our economy long term. And we think we did that. The president says he'll veto it. If that's the test we have to follow, then we might as well disband Congress and let George Bush do whatever he wants to do. You know, last year we passed an unemployment bill. The president said it was garbage. He scoffed at it. He vetoed it. We couldn't override his veto. We passed it again. Again, we couldn't override his veto. We finally were able to pass a bill much like the first bill we passed. By this time, he finally admitted there was a recession in the country, and by the time he signed it, he sounded like it was his idea.
Well, is that...
I see our responsibility as putting forward the best legislation we can and trying to convince the president to finally sign it.
You clearly don't have the votes to pass it over his veto. Are you prepared just to keep passing that same bill and shove it down his throat? Or is there one thing that you could tell us this morning that the Democrats are prepared to put on the table that might lead to a compromise?
Well, I'm afraid that right now the thing that will keep George Bush from signing this bill is the fact that we are willing to ask the wealthiest people in the country to pay their fair share of the tax burden. And we want to give tax relief to the middle class. George Bush, a few weeks ago, said he wanted to do that as well, but now he apparently says that he can't do it if we raise taxes on the wealthy. Pat Buchanan is running a strong campaign against him. I'm sure that he will criticize George Bush if George Bush signs a tax bill that raises taxes even on the wealthiest people in the country.
Mr. Gephardt, why is it that so many economists, Democratic as well as Republican, and even the Democratic chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, Representative Lee Hamilton, say your bill would not provide much in the way of stimulus and would add billions to future deficits?
Well, first, it doesn't add anything to the deficit. In fact, our bill cuts the deficit by $14 billion over 5 years. But let's talk about this business of whether or not this bill will be helpful. You know, the issue here is whether or not you want to do what George Bush wants to do, which is to give another $12,000 tax cut to the wealthiest people in the country, or whether you think those people ought to be asked to pay their fair share of the tax burden and give a $400 or an $800 a year tax cut to middle-income families. I know what I think we ought to do, and the people I talk to here in St. Louis, in my home, who are in the middle class, who are hard-pressed, think that $400 or $800 is a lot of money. I think it's elitist. I think it's out of touch with where the American people are to say that $400 or $800 doesn't mean anything. But let's remember, the tax bill is not the only thing Democrats are talking about. I agree with Lee Hamilton and others that we need to do much more to move this economy in a positive direction. And you'll see next week we'll have a Democratic budget that will be reinvesting in the future of this country by taking needed dollars out of defense where they're not needed, putting it into education, health care, industrial policies to move this country in a positive direction and give our people high-paying jobs.
Now, Mr. Gephardt, one of the things that Mr. Bush wants to do is pass a capital gains tax. You're opposed to capital gains relief. You're opposed to that. One of those 5 people, in fact, arguably the front runner at the moment in the Democratic race, is with Mr. Bush on that. How are you going to deal with that if Mr. Tsongas is nominated?
Well, if you read carefully, I think you'll see that even Senator Tsongas is not for the kind of capital gains tax cut that George Bush is for.
But that's a matter of detail. He thinks that capital gains relief matters.
Johnny, it's not a matter of detail. It's a very important point.
Are you for capital gains relief of any kind?
I'm not, but our bill contains a provision that's targeted and that I think arguably can make sense. George Bush is for cutting the capital gains rate in half for the wealthiest people in the country, giving them an instantaneous, huge $12,000 a year tax break. The Democratic bill, Senator Tsongas's position, is to target that capital gains cut to people that are investing in the future in high-tech and high-risk ventures. I'm sorry?
Why don't you support Senator Tsongas's position then?
Well, the Democratic bill that we passed last week has such a targeted provision in it. I have always said that if you target capital gains, and especially if you would target it at the middle class and in investing in high-risk ventures, that makes sense. We've never heard such a proposal from the president.
One other small topic, which is a large one. We have just a few moments left. Do you still think, as you have in the past, that the Bush policy towards aid to the Soviet Union is bankrupt, inadequate, and otherwise incompetent?
I do. I think the president's done a little bit better lately. We have engaged on this issue a little more, but
what would you do?
Well, here's my problem. This issue is of fundamental importance to all of us and to our future. It's probably the most important foreign policy issue that we've been presented with in 45 years. President Bush, a long time ago, in my view, should have gone before the American people, looked them in the eye, and explained why this was important to us. Interpreting these events in the Soviet Union, telling us why it is in our deep self-interest to help this change in the Soviet Union take place. He hasn't done that. He hasn't convinced anyone in America as to why helping people in the Soviet Union, our former adversary, is in our deep self-interest. And until the only person elected by all the people does that, we will not have a policy adequate to the task.
Where would you find the
Gephardt,
money?
We have to leave it here.
Okay, sir.
Mr. Gephardt, thanks for coming by this morning.
Thank you.
And in a moment, we'll be back with Senator Lloyd Bentsen of Texas.
Meet the Press is sponsored by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. ADM, supermarket to the world.
Corn. Not only is it America's most abundant crop, it's also the most versatile. At the Archer Daniels Midland Company, we get golden corn oil from it, as well as corn sweeteners, ethanol, and protein products used in animal feeds. Today, we're extracting even more sophisticated value-added products from corn. Products such as citric acid, which gives candies and fruit-flavored beverages their tangy flavor. And lysine, an amino acid that optimizes the nutrition of poultry and swine feeds. But even this list is far from complete. Right now, we're developing additional value-added products from corn, along with innovative applications for them. Because at ADM, we believe the potential of this crop is nearly as great as its supply. ADM, supermarket to the world.
We're back talking with Senator Lloyd Bentsen of Texas, the Democrats' vice presidential candidate in 1988. Senator Bentsen, let me begin with you the way I began with Congressman Gephardt. Are you about ready to jump into this Democratic race?
No. You know, I hear about all these drafts, and of course they have drafts in the National Football League, but it's a rare thing indeed in political life today. I think the last time they really had a draft in a locked convention was back in 1920.
So you think the Democratic nominee will be one of the 5 men currently running?
Oh, yes, I do.
The Texas primary is March 10. Have you voted yet?
No, I haven't voted.
Will you?
Yes, of course I'll vote.
And who will you vote for?
And I would say, to further prove my point, half of those delegates are selected in caucus, and I'm not doing anything to try to organize it.
So you'll take no leadership role before the Texas primary?
No, I have not.
Governor Clinton has had some problems in this campaign. About 25% of the voters in the country say they cannot support him in a general election because of the allegations about draft dodging and womanizing. Is that a fair assessment of his candidacy?
No, I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think what you'll see in this situation, as these debates evolve and move along, that they'll be talking about the major issues facing our country. And I think that's what will finally decide who our nominee should be.
Who's the favorite in Texas right now?
I think the recent polls showed Governor Clinton with some lead.
But as for 92, Lloyd Bentsen is out.
That's right.
David?
Just one other political question. When Senator Kerry says that Bill Clinton is unelectable, is that a fair tactic? Is it a correct judgment?
I think it ought to be determined on the issues, David. That's what's important to the country. Who wants to move this country forward and how they'll do it. The fairness in the tax system. What has to be done for education. What we do to cut back on crime and attack the drug dealers. Those are the big issues.
Let's move to this tax bill. You start markup in your committee on Tuesday, I believe.
That's correct.
Are you going to go ahead with your idea of paying for the tax cuts by raising top bracket taxes, even in the face of the president's threatened veto?
What I'm going to do on that one is address the unfairness that has happened to middle-income taxpayers. If you look at the last 10 years, you'll see that their taxes have gone up while their income has gone down. You're seeing where both parents are working now, where they've added a month to their work hours for a year, where they have less time for parenting, less leisure time, a tough time making ends meet. On the other side of it, you've seen the top 1% of our people have their tax cuts substantially increased, while their income has gone up. Now, that kind of a situation has to be addressed, and that's what I'm doing. So we will have a tax cut that for the average income family, which is $35,000 a year, that they'll have a 25% tax cut. And that's for a family of 4 with 2 children. And that will be permanent, and
Senator,
that will address the problem.
When you were on this program a couple months ago with Budget Director Darman, you sounded pretty hopeful about being able to find a compromise with the administration. Now you seem to be going ahead, as the House did, framing a bill that you know the president will veto. Tell me why a viewer would not conclude that the Democrats really are more interested in an issue than in providing any tax relief for people.
David, I've taken out of the 7 proposals that the president has proposed to try to encourage investment, to move the economy, I've taken 6 of those into my legislation. And then I've added to it with a front-end IRA, so it's deductible up front to encourage savings in this country. In addition to that, I've put in better access to health care. And he took much of that out of my bill and put into his bill. And that's to address the problems of job lock in this country, where someone has a pre-existing condition, a back problem, their child does, and they can't change jobs.
But
now, those are things that are in his legislation, too. That is an attempt to get a bipartisan approach to this.
But you have put in the one thing that you know will draw a veto, which is the tax increase for the top brackets. Why shouldn't we conclude that this is simply to frame an issue for November?
Well, when I put those things together in a bipartisan way, I'm hopeful that he'll change his mind. He's done that before.
Do you have any reason to believe, Senator, that he will? Have you got some message that we don't know about?
Well, I'm working at it when I say this, that I have done these things that are complementary to the 2 efforts from Democrats and Republicans. That is an honest effort on my part to see if we can't resolve this thing. And I think the big question in this is addressing the fairness issue, to see that we take care of that one, and to answer the question of, will this piece of legislation result in better tax legislation than that on the books today? And I think the answer is a resounding yes.
Let me push you just a bit more, Senator. Have you had any discussions with people in the administration as to what they might be willing to accept? Official or unofficial discussion?
Well, when you run into that kind of a situation, they're not going to tip their hand ahead of time. You understand that. And,
so you're trying to deduce what they might accept?
I am trying to put some things in there, anticipating what we could do to have a bipartisan solution to it and to move this economy forward and restore some fairness to the tax system.
Now, let me ask you what I asked Representative Gephardt. Is it going to cause you any problem if Mr. Tsongas, with his economic policies, which have been described as well out of the mainstream of the Democratic Party on such questions as capital gains and others, if he were the nominee?
I think what you see in Mr. Tsongas, when he says he's against the tax cut for children, I think he says that because he sees what was proposed by the president adding to the deficits. You see, the president's bill he's presenting busts the budget, adds to the deficit by some $27 billion. So the children of the future would be paying for that tax cut. The bill that I'm introducing is deficit neutral. It is paid for every step of the way and does not add to that deficit.
I wanted to hark back just for a moment to something you said earlier. You said you thought the campaign would develop with the candidates being judged not on personal attacks, but on their statements on the issues, their development of the issues. Last night there was a fierce slanging match in Denver. Governor Romer of Colorado says all the candidates are misreading the electorate. He says they want answers, not candidates chewing on one another. Are you at all concerned about this new tone that's developed in the last week or 10 days? Is it a problem for your party?
It's a problem for both parties. And it reminds me of some of the things that happened in 1988 when the Willie Horton ads were run against Dukakis. I don't like to see us resort to that kind of a campaign. I think that's a serious mistake for both sides.
Do you think the party leadership You could be described as a member of the party leadership, probably would be, should get together and say to these candidates, cut it out, this is not what the American people want?
Unfortunately, what we have seen is that it apparently pays off, and that's the sad part of the deal. I watched that once again with the Willie Horton ad.
Senator, will it be more difficult for President Bush to compromise on a tax and budget plan as long as Pat Buchanan stays in this race?
Well, thinking of some of the attacks that Pat Buchanan is making, I suppose that's correct. But if you're going to move this country forward, it means that you don't take just something that totally is accepted by one side. It calls for compromise. That's the democratic process. But I think these things that I put in this piece of legislation to present to the tax committee, to the finance committee, are things that do that and that can appeal to Republicans and Democrats alike.
And on the issue of aid to the former Soviet Union, again, do you think that Pat Buchanan's America First campaign is having a chilling effect upon the Bush administration response?
Well, I think that what you have to see in that kind of a situation is trying to do those things to help the Russians make the transition. And we should stress that. I think we have a great opportunity there.
Has the president seized upon it?
No, I don't think he has. I think much more has to be done.
Senator Bentsen, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for coming by and Meet the Press.
Thank you.
And in a minute, David Broder, Johnny and Apple, I will be back to talk about, what else? The presidential campaign.
We are the spark in the engine, the switch in the night, a voice in the dark from a million miles away. We are the beats and the slash, the clicks and the flash. We are TV, we are the good things you hear and see. We bring good things to life.
Now, yesterday we were talking about food. Today we're going to talk about where it comes from. Does anybody know? Jill?
It comes from the grocery store.
Well, yes, but before that, anybody else? Andy?
Food comes from the farmers who grow it, and all the other people who help turn it into the food that we eat every day.
American agriculture is something we can all be proud of. It's not only America's biggest industry, it's the most productive system of its kind in history.
That's very good. How do you know so much about food?
Well, my dad's a great teacher. Hey, Tammy! Hey, Dad!
Considering how abundant food is in this country, it's easy to see why some people take it for granted. Fortunately, a lot of other people don't. ADM, supermarket to the world.
Imagine your refrigerator with bigger door shelves for bigger bottles, with leftovers left in quick-serve trays for leftover space, more space, nearly 27 cubic feet, and a door in the door for things you use more. Imagine GE's Space Center 27.
Well, Johnny, we got the closest thing we can to a Sherman-esque statement from both Congressman Gephardt and Senator Bentsen that they're out for 92. They both said the nominee will come from the 5 who are in the field. Are any of them going to survive this primary and debate process?
Well, Sam Rayburn used to say that despite all appearances, somebody's going to win. And I think this is one of those elections. I don't think we should underestimate or pretend that, underestimate the degree of opposition to all of these candidates, either in the electorate or on Capitol Hill and in Washington. The joke of the week that I kept hearing on Capitol Hill is that the Democratic Party is in terrible shape. It's got 2 front runners, both named Elmer, Fudd and Gantry. When you hear this kind of stuff coming in over the transom, so to speak, it bespeaks a real dissatisfaction. And that is not eased by the kind of slanging match we had last night.
David, Congressman Gadenson of Connecticut said there is massive nervousness about Governor Clinton's candidacy in the sense that he is the nominee, by the time we get to the general election campaign, he may be fatally flawed by another revelation. Any concern on the Hill?
The Democrats on the Hill are chronically nervous Nellies. I mean, I've never seen people. They only have a re-election rate of 95%, and they're all dying of anxiety perpetually. Let me be a little contrarian. I think what we're seeing right now on the Democratic side is largely an artifact of the campaign schedule. I think it's something like 17 states that vote in this 10-day window that we're in right now. The candidates do not have much time or opportunity to draw the distinctions very carefully. So they go to the shorthand, which often means the kind of the bumper sticker slogan stage of the thing. When we come out of this on March 10th, somebody will be leading that Democratic field in delegate count, and that person will be the likely nominee. So I think the Democrats are going through stormy weather now, but they may be in a two-week period.
And Senator Tsongas, particularly if he wins Maryland and Colorado and does reasonably well in Georgia, he'll make a claim. If Governor Clinton...
I don't know which of these three people. I don't know how it's going to sort out between Tsongas, Clinton, and Kerry, but one of them will be the front runner, coming out legitimately called the front runner for the first time on the night of March 10th.
Serious threat to the president in Georgia from Buchanan? Johnny?
I don't think so.
You don't think so. That's all for today. Johnny, David, thanks for coming by. We'll be back next week. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. See you then.
Technology. All our mathematics, our computations. Somehow they all add up to moments that are beyond any calculation.
Meet the Press has been sponsored by GE. From plastics to financial services, we bring good things to life. For a printed transcript of Meet the Press, send $1 and a stamped self-addressed envelope to Kelly Press, Box 12160, Silver Spring, Maryland, 20908.
This week on Today, Robert Stack with Unsolved Mysteries.
Also, Boys in the Hood director John Singleton and Tito Puente on How to Mambo.
Join us this week on Today.
Is your marriage on the rocks?
I don't like the way she talks, and she doesn't like the way I walk.
Learn how fighting can keep you together.
And that is the first step.
On the next A Closer Look.
Harding, old money. Nice guy. Bogosian, pharmaceuticals. Shoots in the low 80s. That's Vanderpool, oil. Good backhand.
Who's that?
Turpin, gazillionaire.
What's he like?
He's smart.
Stop by Betts Lexus Des Moines and see how smart driving an LS 400 can be.
Remember when Grandma used to make us flaky pies made from scratch? Grab a fork down the